Now to our top story this morning, and a civil war has broken out in Westminster as the Prime Minister is forced to deny that he has lost control of the government just 77 days into his premiership amid the Sue Gray row.
Sir Keir Starmer defended himself after questions over Gray's £170,000 salary that reportedly exceeds his own.
Reports suggest that Sue Gray's wage was leaked in a deliberate attempt to damage her politically.
And this comes as Rachel Reeves has been given a £10 billion budget boost by the Bank of England.
Despite this, reports suggest that the Chancellor will press ahead with scrapping winter fuel payments. That's despite major backlash.
And we're now joined in the studio by political commentator Tom Slater. Not a good bunch of headlines by the Labour Party in any means, really.
No, it's really, really terrible for them. And I think this is a reminder of Keir Starmer's fundamental weaknesses, really, because he doesn't have a lot of politics to him, he doesn't have a lot of vision, he has the kind of all the charisma of a sort of disappointed deputy head teacher. He's not a particularly compelling individual. But what he did run on was the idea that I am Mr. Rules, I'm Mr. Rectitude, and also I will run a very tidy operation. And what this series of internal briefings and leaks and questions about all of these free clothes and tickets he's been receiving has done, it's completely unravelled that. And it's just a reminder, I think, that the Labour Party have tried to play this game in recent years of pretending that what is unfortunately the normal grubby business of politics, there's a lot of money flowing around, there's a lot of favours being given and taken, and there's also a lot of backstabbing that takes place. They've tried to pretend that's a uniquely Tory problem. Now that they're in power, people are being reminded that, in many respects, both parties can be as bad as each other on these fronts.
And this is the problem, isn't it? Because British people do not like hypocrites. And Sir Keir Starmer has not broken the rules here. We're not suggesting that he has. He has declared everything. But when you set yourself up as a different kind of politician, when you promise to crack down on cronyism, you are setting yourself up for a fall, aren't you? Unless you do behave completely differently.
No, absolutely. And they've tried to create this halo around themselves. And I've been struck by what short memories the commentariat seem to have. The new Labour years were defined by scandals and backstabbing and leaks and a lot of, Peter Mandelson spending some time on a yacht and then suddenly some donations rolling in to the Labour Party coffers. So it was a remarkable trick that the Labour Party pulled off by pretending they were so much different than the grubby business of Westminster politics would suggest. What the difference is, though, I think, is that you need a kind of vision and a policy programme to fall back on. You need to be able... These things can bounce off of a government if you've got the country behind you and they're united behind what it is you want to do with the country. Because all Keir Starmer has is basically belt-tightening and things are going to get worse before they maybe will get better, these issues and these scandals will dog him to a greater degree than they otherwise would, I think.
Really interesting, Katie Balls of The Spectator has written in The Times today and tweeted out a section of her column. In his memoirs, Blair said that he came to regret hounding John Major's government over standards and sleaze. It was a media game, and in opposition we played it, he wrote. The goals were easy, but the long-term consequences were disastrous. That's what should give Starmer pause now. His chickens are coming home to roost, aren't they? No,
absolutely. I think that's spot on. And they were playing a very difficult game. They were going around pretending in recent years that no politician had ever told a few porkies before, that no politician had ever taken a free holiday off of a donor before, that no politician had ever presided over a government in which there was a lot of leaking before. And now they're being held to that standard. And I think a lot of potentially younger voters in particular are starting to see that vision which has been presented to the Labour Party wasn't quite up to the reality.
I just want to pick up on that idea of vision, because essentially what you're saying is that if they had an overarching vision, a purpose, then perhaps these headlines would go away. And if you think about previous governments, obviously Thatcher's government had a huge mission, the Blair government to reform the Constitution, whatever you think about that, even Boris Johnson's government to get Brexit done. What actually is the defining purpose, the defining mission of Starmer's government?
It's impossible to say. I mean, Keir Starmer's only consistent political view has been that he would quite like to be Prime Minister. He's now there, and it's a bit like the dog that caught the car. He doesn't quite know what to do with it. And I think what also is preoccupying the government to an almost excessive degree is trying to neutralise the idea that Labour are sort of spendthrift and whatever. So as a consequence of that, they've ended up really leaning into what they call tough decisions, but what often look just like bad decisions to a lot of the public. And what I've been so struck by is that they've been, in a way, kind of cribbing the kind of George Osborne playbook in terms of how to deal with the economy and how to do that, but at the same time with a less optimistic, if that's strange to say, sort of message. So I think the big problem in the heart of all of this is that these are politicians who don't have much politics to begin with, and now we're starting to find that out.
Let's talk about Rachel Reeves, shall we, who's been provided this £10 billion boost from the Bank of England. There's going to be huge pressure on her now, isn't there, to U-turn on scrapping the winter fuel allowance?
No, absolutely, especially because of the horror stories and the statistics we've seen in recent days. 7 out of 10 disabled pensioners losing their winter fuel allowance, the proportion of them who are actually already below the poverty line who will lose their winter fuel allowance, in the context of not only this £10 billion being freed up, but also of Keir Starmer enjoying, £7,000 or £8,000 boxes at the Emirates every week. It's going to be really difficult, but I think she's very wedded to this bitter medicine narrative, and I don't think she'll be able to wriggle free from that, really.
And moving on to the Conservative leadership race, another one. Robert Jenrick's really stuck his neck out this morning. He's been talking about how English identity is under threat. Is he trying to move into Farage's turf?
I think so. I think he's really keen to take those issues of kind of migration, national identity, and really make that key to his particular platform. I mean, the argument that he's making here is it's mass immigration, it's also the sort of liberal elite sneering at the question of national identity. The thing I would say is it's less immigration per se, which I think is the problem here when it comes to kind of patriotism or Englishness or whatever. I think it's the combination of mass immigration and multiculturalism. And also, I think the biggest menace on these things are white middle-class liberals, really. I mean, that old Orwell caricature of there's a certain type of British intellectual who'd rather steal from a poor box and sing the national anthem is very, very true. And I'm always quite struck by the fact that if you look at polls, it's actually ethnic minority Brits, the descendants of migrants certainly, who tend to be more patriotic than your average, which I think is quite telling. But no, you're absolutely right. I think this is him really trying to lean into those issues of migration and identity, which have been around the Tory party leadership at this point, but not really come to the centre of discussion just yet.